Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today for Crunch 3.6, KPIs for the Ethical Ad Economy, which is an event series that continues to be supported by our tab partners, Google and Xandr, as well as our partner Yukon. So this is the final Crunch event in our interconnected series of 3, which have repositioned the AOP's core areas of focus to align with a more purposeful context. This theme is, however, something we as the AOP are very keen to continue to focus on and drive positive action around going into 2021. Today's discussion examines how emerging metrics are driving more ethical, business positive outcomes between the buy and sell side, as we look at ways in which our industry can build a more productive future. To begin this session, I'll hand over to Amy Williams, founder of Good Loop, to introduce our guests and open up the discussion. Amy, over to you.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can't see you yet. Let me just see if I can.
I can't start my video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, apologies.
No worries.
Sure that's now. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, you should be able to start it now.
Right.
Apologies for that.
Good. Also, perfect timing. The bin men have just arrived outside, so it's all going on.
Always good. Always good.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction, Jenna. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We are talking today about the KPIs of ethics, how we can make our industry more accountable and more ethical. And it is commonly said that what gets measured is what gets done. So I thought, just to get our juices flowing, to get us all revved up, I would share some examples of when metrics have gone terribly wrong. So I went to a book called The Tyranny of Metrics by Jerry Muller. He has 2 fantastic examples I'm going to quickly share. The first is about 100 years ago, Chinese peasants were paid to find dinosaur skeletons. They realized that in China there's this amazing wealth of dinosaur skeletons, and you get paid per skeleton, you get paid per bone you find. So what actually eventually ended up happening was people would find this incredible specimen, this like amazing rare dinosaur bone, and then they would chop it into 6 pieces and get paid 6 times. So there's this complete loss of knowledge in this particular area of China. The other example that I thought was a really, really lovely one, actually not lovely at all, but quite a good example of what could go wrong. In India, the British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobras in Delhi. So the government offered a bounty for every dead cobra that was brought to the government, which of course led to enterprising people raising cobras in their homes, which then obviously got released and the amount of cobras in the city went up. So I thought we'd start with some of that just to kind of set the scene of, what's at stake here. And, in our industry, reach metrics drive us to get the maximum number of eyeballs for the minimal possible price, and click-through rates fuel misinformation and clickbait and encourage incendiary, divisive content. I think it's fair to say that we can't live and die by views and clicks and conversions. So this panel is about investing in understanding our consumers as people. It's about shifting from numbers towards real attention, meaningful brand experience, and ultimately building brand love and trust. And today we have a panel of speakers who are coming from really different perspectives on this issue. So hopefully we'll get a really nice view of how each piece of the industry can play their role. We're going to consider what, if we agree that what gets measured is what gets done, then let's consider what we can measure as an industry to ensure that we become more ethical, more sustainable, more diverse, and more accountable. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dan. Dan Hagen is the Global Head of Media Experience at Havas, and he's going to talk about how we can make advertising more meaningful.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Amy. Morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. You're coming to the end of the year in the best way you can. It's great to be here talking about something that's really meaningful to me, both personally and professionally, and also with such a great group of brilliant and passionate folks as well. Right, I've got a quick 5 minutes. I quite like talking, so I'm going to try to be as organized as I can. Amy, please keep me on track when I invariably go over. I want to start, I guess, with a little bit of a sort of personal draw for myself. So I rejoined Havas about 13 months ago. And I joined for a really specific reason, to do with their positioning, to do with the story that they were starting to tell in the marketplace, a story around meaningful media, and the creation of media experiences rather than media plans. We call it MX within the agency. But I really liked, and I was really motivated by the idea that we're going to try to use media to make a meaningful difference to brands, to businesses, and people. And actually, over the last year, this has evolved sort of even further, very much in line with world events that we have all partaken in, but also with the personal values of people in the agency. And we're talking more and more about being values driven in order to then drive value for our clients. And in being values driven, we're taking a number of actions across a number of areas. And I wanted to talk just about a few of those and then talk a little bit about how we're beginning to measure them. I think the measurement challenge is substantial. So one of the first things that we've done is we've looked at ourselves. We've looked at our own organization, and we've joined the Conscious Ad Network. For those of you unfamiliar, the Conscious Ad Network they're basically working to make the ad industry a more positive, contributory industry to the well-being of people and the care of people through 6 key manifestos that they work to. And those are about hate speech, children's well-being, fake news, anti-fraud, diversity, and informed consent. And we basically looked at those manifestos. We joined CAN, and we've audited our entire internal workflow in order to ensure we're doing everything we can to live up to those manifestos. So we've inflated them. We've created 10 internal work streams, which are then run by different groups of, and I'll be honest, super passionate people. This is one of the easiest initiatives to get people galvanized around because they believe in what we're doing. They believe in trying to bring some of those, I guess, ethics and an ethical way of doing what we do. And it's about some of the things Amy talked about. It's about, how do we think about building segments of people so that we're doing that in a less biased way? How do we ensure that what we do for our clients adds value to people's media experiences rather than detracts from those? And then critically, how do we kind of measure that? Now, I know some of the other speakers today are going to talk about attention in a little bit more detail, so I'm not going to dwell on that and go into detail on that. But it's something that we're really, really interested in because by its very nature, thinking about attention skews you towards better environments, where things like context and things like content become much more important. And I think that even though it's hard to measure, even though measuring attention tends to be different across different platforms and different media types, the very nature of it starts to bring you in the right direction. A few other initiatives that are really starting to gain scale across the business. And again, they fit really nicely with those manifestos from the Conscious Ad Network. So the first of those is diversity. And I want to talk about that more in terms of where we buy our media and less about the makeup of our and other people's organizations, although that, of course, is important and we're doing lots in that space. But what we're trying to do in terms of where we buy our media is to give our clients the opportunity to increase their potential for ethical investment by curating what we're calling social equity marketplaces, where the publishers have met certain criteria. Again, this brings us back to that thought about measurement. And this is not always easy. Some of those criteria are somewhat subjective, but some of those criteria can be measured. So this is about the ownership of those publishers. This is about the board makeup of those publishers. This is about the sustainability credentials of those publishers. Are they carbon neutral? Are they carbon negative? Are they carbon positive? It's about their work, diversity and inclusivity policies, and how they go about doing business, and effectively where the money that is spent with them then goes. We've now curated around 50 partners across the world and launched these social equity marketplaces. They have different themes to them. Some are more organized around sustainability, others are more organized around minority ownership and different group ownerships. And we have some clients who are really interested in the opportunity to invest their money in a more ethical and responsible way. So Michelin and Moen were both launch partners of these when we launched them in the US over the course of the summer. So that's a really interesting way. And we're looking at things like how the percentage of our spend starts to increase in these types of areas, and more money is being funneled into these areas that need it. Another area where I think there's some really interesting future opportunities is this area around informed consent. We all know we want as much data as we can get our hands on so that we can get insight, so that we can better target people appropriately and understand and measure what we're doing. But I think there are opportunities now to be much more equitable in the exchange we have with consumers for that data. So we're investing in innovations around things like zero-party data solutions. And there are a number of companies that are springing up in the US. In Italy, we're working with a company. In the US, we're working with companies where there is that equitable exchange between the advertiser and also the consumer. So we can still harness that data for insights, but it's done with consent, it's done transparently, and there's a value passed back to the people who are giving that data. It's not a scaled proposition yet, and certainly there aren't big global players who are in this space yet, but it's something that we're pushing hard. I want to finish off my quick 5 minutes to talk about the impact on people. And I think this is a really interesting and a really important measure that quite often can be overlooked. So the internal response to initiatives like the Conscious Ad Network, to initiatives like the social equity marketplaces, has been phenomenally strong. Our people, and I think lots of people, are genuinely looking for ways to make a bigger and a better difference to society. And one of the most impactful ways that we can do this is through our professional work. That's where we have often the greatest reach. So giving people these opportunities to be involved, I think, is super, super powerful. And we're actually now seeing that stretch outside the organization. And in the last 2 weeks, I got an email from a member of the leadership team in our UK office who wanted to call out a job opportunity that they had where 2 candidates had come in and applied for that job, and they had specifically mentioned some of the initiatives around the Conscious Ad Network and reading about those initiatives as being a key reason that they were coming to have asked for employment. And I think for me, that's an incredibly powerful measure of the importance and also the small, as 2 people, but growing success around these types of initiatives and how incredibly important and motivating they can be for people. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That was a really lovely illustration of how positivity can be applied. There's so many different layers within the organization. And I completely agree that our industry is full of talented, creative, energetic people who feel a little bit jaded and feel a little bit lost. Our trust barometer is below estate agents at this point. So making a difference is, as you say, one of the easiest initiatives to get off the ground. And someone that can probably add to that commentary. So our next speaker, Lauren Ogendecko, she's a board director at PhD UK and is leading on their digital media solutions. She's also the co-chair of the multicultural board at OMG UK. So over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Amy. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I've been having mic issues all week. Really happy to be here today, and similar to what Dan said, amongst really great people. So I'm going to try and go through my 5 minutes of chat, and bear with me if I go over. So 2020 has been a monumental and pivotal year for the entire world. And you don't need me to repeat, what's been happening over the last year, but I'm going to take you through a couple of moments to really sort of spur your thinking. The Great Reset has been spurred via the global pandemic. We've seen a groundswell of consciousness spring up and a natural rise to sustainability, which is brilliant. And according to a Nielsen study, recent study, 73% of global consumers say that they would definitely or probably change their consumption habits to reduce their impact on the environment. And another recent Accenture study shows that 50% of consumers are also willing to pay for more products that are produced in a sustainable manner. And as a group, as Omnicom, we are tracking our carbon footprint. I'm sure the other agencies and organisations are doing the same. And we've got a myriad of sustainability initiatives to ensure that we're reducing our emissions and producing work in a more conscious way. And besides COVID, the horrific death of George Floyd earlier this year, which played out on all our TV screens and devices, caused an undeniable shift in the way racial equality is viewed and treated. And prior to George Floyd, which seems like a millennia ago, because this year has just felt so long, there were very low levels of inaction towards racial equality. I think we can all agree that not much was being done. The Black Lives Matter movement actually started in 2013, and it rose to global prominence following George Floyd. And everyone, it feels like everybody has finally acknowledged the systemic issues that has mostly affected people of African and Caribbean origin. And if I can take you back to 2015 and 2016, when Tom Knox, who was the then IPA president, set KPIs and targets for our industry, that by 2020, so that's this year, we should have women holding 40%, at least 40% of senior positions. That's currently at 34%. And we should also have at least 25% of entry-level recruitments from non-white backgrounds. That's currently at 17%. And 15% of people, at least 15% of people in senior leadership positions should also be from non-white backgrounds. That's at a paltry 4.7%. And that's actually regressed from 2018 figures, which was at 5.5%. And pre-George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, according to a Washington Post article via Glassdoor, diversity and inclusion jobs dropped by a whopping 60%. And after George Floyd, this rose to 50%. And D&I is usually an area that sees significantly less investment and is first to be cut, as well as training when it's time to make savings. And then what then followed after all of this was a profound response from the world, from global corporations pledging their commitments to do better. And at a macro level, you've got the government initiative, which is the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, looking at key areas that are systemically affecting people from a marginalized background. So education, health, crime, policing, employment, and enterprise. And from a macro level, from an organization perspective, from PhD and Omnicom, and I'm sure other agencies are doing the same, we're looking at key areas to ensure that we're developing a more diverse and inclusive industry within our organizations, which are concentrated around recruitment, retention, and growth. And we've got clear targets and KPIs to make sure that we are keeping to those commitments. And I can talk about that a bit later. And as for our clients, we're looking at our entire supply chain with targets and KPIs also. And to drill down into clients a little bit further, we've got a number of clients that are looking at how they are also approaching developing a more inclusive and diverse organizations within their corporations. We've seen an uptick in clients asking for our approach to D&I and strategic plans to D&I as part of pitch RFIs. Quite a few has come up over the last few months. And we've got an OMG division called Unite, which is a specialist multicultural marketing agency that's been supporting client activity when it comes to reaching a more diverse and inclusive audience. However, we've actually seen clients being more intentional about ensuring that there is a D&I lens over all campaign planning and expanding reach to a more diverse set of publications that would otherwise not necessarily benefit from that investment prior to the groundswell of awareness. And some of our clients have developed their own advanced scoring mechanism to ensure inclusivity runs throughout campaign planning straight through to activation, which is brilliant to see. And our OMG Unite proposition is now becoming a more defined part of our approach to media planning and buying. We've got a reduction of keyword block lists to favor more contextually focused targeting. And more of this will follow in a way of public announcements. I don't want to spill the beans too much. And from an activation perspective, whilst tech can't solely be responsible for determining what is ethical, it can assist us to be better at understanding how to assess brand suitability. and help us in aid us in ensuring that we're supporting our clients' CSR efforts. So we lean on tools within Double Verify, and we have a suite of proprietary non-public tools that are helping us achieve this. And if I can use a programmatic example, from a programmatic point of view, we've banned blacklist and whitelist in terms of referring to lists, and we now use terms such as positive and negative lists. And we run small site lists, which are manually vetted by our teams and assessed for suitability. And we feel that this is an important step for our buyers to take to ensure that quality and ethics are maintained throughout an auto-rhythmic buying process. We're creating updated measurement frameworks and exploring more attention-based metrics to continue to make sure that our clients are investing in ethical ways. And in closing, to truly understand the severity that comes with not having a diverse and ethical ecosystem, which I want you to think about the recent examples that are happening in the data and privacy market. So stricter legislation has forced organizations to develop processes and ensure that data collection and processes abide by the new law. And if an organization falls foul of or allows data breaches to take place, they're liable for fines upwards of 4% of their total annual worldwide turnover. That's a really large amount of money. So the immediate incentive there is to ensure that you've got a robust and rigorous data and privacy approach in place, because you don't want to be fined. And I think the advertising industry needs to have an approach to diversity and ethics in the same way, with the same sort of severity. We need standardized KPIs across our entire supply chain, from the way we approach our own businesses to how we treat our people, to how we approach our clients' businesses, how we create, curate, and buy and plan media on their behalf. There's also a huge part to play from trade bodies and government organisations to ensure that we evolve and have a long-lasting and thriving industry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. You've articulated so well how this year is such a watershed year for us. It's such a pivotal moment. You know, the Black Lives Matter hashtag was tweeted over 3 million times a day in the month of May. And it drove some really meaningful conversations in our industry about, you know, the role that our media dollars play in fueling the hate and misinformation that so often affects those communities. So, you know, the Stop Hate for Profit boycott and all of the actions that were taken, it has been such a catalyst this year. And you're so right to call out that, you know, if we don't put in place the structures and KPIs and systemic changes now, whilst the momentum is there, it's so easy to slip back. It's so easy to slip back into bad habits. So I think the Great Reset is a great example of that, and we'll come back to that in the questions at the end. So next up we have Anthony. So Anthony Crocker is a head of campaign innovation at The Telegraph. Obviously, it's already been touched on a few times, but funding quality journalism is such an important metric for our industry. So Anthony is going to bring a really interesting perspective on how we capture that and map that against positive brand outcomes.
Lovely, thank you, Amy. So just to kind of give you a bit of context, the starting point for us really taking a focus towards looking at attention quality and what we refer to as the metrics that matter began in 2018, when the Telegraph shifted towards a sub-strategy. And that obviously, for lots of obvious reasons, pivoted a lot of the approach that we had to the way that we viewed our product and viewed the way that we interacted with our readers. So that kind of really looked at shifting specifically away from scale for the sake of scale towards that kind of meaningful engagement, looking at kind of building on that heritage that we had as a trusted and valued brand to kind of create retention and long-term meaningful relationships with our readers, which we refer to, you know, our customers as readers and not users, as some kind of publisher and tech platforms would. And it really makes sure that just the kind of the core product, our quality journalism, is at the absolute heart of everything we do. specifically, one of the kind of more tangible, obvious changes to the customer experience was the change we made to the website layout. So that looked at creating a really kind of nice reader first environment, removing some of the intrusive, invasive ads, definitely removing the ad ratio so that there was kind of, usually, 9 times out of 10, 1 ad per screen, maybe 2, but majority of times just that. And stripping back a lot of the code, getting rid of things like jenking that just created a really kind of not very nice experience. And the other kind of really kind of vital thing we did was created that kind of full width editorial experience, so that actually, finally the content was front and center of everything that the reader was looking at. So that had some really obvious impacts on the sales team, and I joined the commercial innovation team with the specific remit at looking at how we could demonstrate that value of our environment, look at really sort of monetizing the subscription strategy and that reader first environment. And one of the things that we realized was that actually we just weren't using the right language, we weren't focusing in the right areas. If you consider kind of the typical metrics that you use as a publisher, viewability and CTR, as you previously mentioned, they don't really talk about everything that happens in between, and they certainly don't demonstrate, the quality of, the environment that you offer and the impact that your quality environment has on, the resonance that readers have with a brand that's advertising in that space. And further to that, actually, what you do is create an environment where kind of clickbait, intrusive ads, kind of gaming clicks is much more possible, and encouraged even, because actually that is where you're kind of demonstrating positive performance. And so we really wanted to kind of go back to the drawing board in terms of the way that we approached demonstrating value to our customers, from advertising customers, and how we could demonstrate that actually our environment was delivering against the correct metrics. One of the things that we looked at was the research. So research has shown us, time and time again, that environment was kind of really crucial to delivering a good quality attention and good ad experience. So the IAB rules of attention, for example, was really crucial to building out that piece of evidence. The fact that actually they had done, extensive kind of research to show that actually having a low ad ratio, making sure that your ads and that your content was sharing that kind of space in a really nice, harmonious way and not fighting for attention, was absolutely important. But we also looked at things like the ripple effect and the halo effect, which actually went further than saying that it was a positive thing, but actually really looked at the negative impacts. For example, 70% of consumers said that they would consider stop using a brand altogether if they saw it advertised in what they considered to be a low quality environment. And so there's really, we were really very passionate then about going out and talking to the market about the fact that they're focusing on the wrong thing, and actually without really considering the publishers that they're funding and putting their ads in, without thinking about that, without considering that list, there's some kind of real risk that's the damage that they'll do to their brand long term, whilst the metrics they're looking at will potentially be giving them a false idea of a positive situation. And so kind of the first thing we did was look at the attention metrics. So we kind of really approached this from sort of a pyramid kind of visibility. So if you think at the bottom, fundamentally to everything we do, we need to look at the attention metrics, how we're delivering that campaign, how we're optimizing that campaign. Then we kind of look into how that impacts the brand uplift and the brand perception. And then finally, we want to really focus on kind of how we're demonstrating the business outcomes that we have there. So just going back to those attention metrics, we kind of realized that it'd been under our nose the entire time. We've worked with Moat for years, and actually we have a number of additional metrics to in view and click through that actually help us demonstrate quality attention. So we kind of, we first went out to market with 11 metrics, and a lot of the feedback we had was, hang on a minute, that's really complicating things. We click might not be right, but one of the reasons it's successful is because it's a single metric and a single kind of understanding of whether a campaign is performed. So we looked to simplify that into 3 simple questions. And that was, not only is your ad in view, but is your ad in view for a meaningful amount of time? So that's actually, you know, our research and our insight is beginning to show us that actually the amount of time that something's in view is equally as crucial to it being in view at all. And actually, without having that additional context, it's very easy to game an in-view rate based on, you know, the qualification for something being in view. If you consider it's half a second, that's, you know, not a meaningful amount of time at all. And then looking at things like interaction with the ad, which doesn't necessarily rely on click. So you can look at things like hover rate, attention quality, and interaction, but also looking at the amount of time that somebody's interacting with that ad as well. That really helps us determine whether that interaction is meaningful and whether it's going to have driven kind of that brand resonance that leads to kind of recall and kind of those brand uplift measures. And then finally, it's really, really crucial that you look at how people are engaging with the content. So we give stats around our editorials, such as propensity to scroll and active page dwell. It's really important because we know that there's that halo effect, and actually if you have a reader first environment that shares that space harmoniously with the ads, then actually there's a huge benefit to the ads, that you create a lean in mindset where people are receptive to the information that they're taking in, and that will also be afforded to the ads in that space as well. So that's the starting point. And actually, you know, a huge journey for us was really making sure that we got that right internally, not just from an understanding how those different metrics kind of interact with each other, but actually how we can use them as an optimization piece as well. And when I kind of talk about how we use them for optimization, it always reminds me of an example I have where we had a film client once, years ago when I was working in the account management team, before we were looking at metrics that matter. And actually we were doing some optimization work, which meant that because of the click-through rate not being as high, we needed to shift inventory away from our film channel, and it just didn't feel right. And at the time, we just didn't have the language or the dialogue in order to kind of demonstrate that actually there was a lot of good reasons why the content that we were putting out should have remained in a relevant channel. But because we were just looking at clicks and it wasn't necessarily getting clicks in that space, you know, we weren't able to kind of, you know, do anything else. It was kind of, our hands were tied. We've since kind of developed the metric with that particular client. I think one of the things that helped is they have moved more towards video and streaming, which has really encouraged them to look at things like dwell and interaction and not just focus on clicks. But it's really great now that we have, you know, the optimization language in place that doesn't just focus on clicks and a single in-view rate, that actually it's looking at all the other things that happen in between those to really give context. You know, and it's worth pointing out as well that there's nothing wrong with the click. What I'm kind of talking about here is that unqualified click, where you haven't got any of the kind of prior evidence for the quality of the attention or anything that suggests that somebody's enjoyed that experience to then justify the click. And that's what makes it really easy to game and create those kind of clickbaity, intrusive ad environments. But that's all good and well, but actually it's really important that you demonstrate that that's had an impact on the brand. And so we started working with brand metrics towards the end of last year, and they help us track how we've delivered uplift in 4 key areas. So that's awareness, consideration, preference, and action intent. And that's really crucial because it gives us the opportunity to demonstrate that we have delivered, and we quite often do deliver, you know, above benchmark impact and uplift in those areas. But it also gives us something else other than just click to talk about as a result. You know, tangible evidence that this campaign's had an impact. It really takes that pressure off of that sort of final action, because, you know, if you're going to be buying, you know, a luxury watch or a car, it's very unlikely that you're going to click through on a website to buy that in that moment. And so it gives us the opportunity to talk about some of the metrics that are really important to that particular client in that time. And then the final part for us really is, and it's a bit of a work in progress, is we're really looking to demonstrate how we can deliver those business outcomes with long-term tracking. We're not interested in delivering short-term, you know, punchy, you know, unqualified performance. It really is about demonstrating that actually, if you focus on the attention metrics and then really consider how you've, you know, had an impact on your brand uplift, eventually that, you know, you will see those business outcomes. We're really still working out how to do that. But actually, one thing that I would say is, it would be great to have more support from advertisers in this space, collaborate with us, share that data. Quite often we don't really see what happens with that customer journey beyond our own website. So it'd be really great for us to have a bit more context to help us make some informed decisions about some of the earlier stuff, but also kind of reconsider what you think is success as well. I think because we have focused on things like click-through for so long, quite often people talk about just traffic to their site, but actually, are you really considering what why is that so important that you get traffic to your website? We had a client recently that it was great because we presented about the end of campaign report to them, and instead of talking about traffic, they actually said, you didn't drive the highest number of people to our site, but actually, if we looked at the customer behavior of the people that came from the Telegraph versus from other publishers, they dwelled for much longer and they had much more positive kind of customer behaviors on the website afterwards. And that's exactly the kind of conversations we want to have. We want to make sure that we're not just driving, scale for the sake of scale and a ton of customers for the sake of it that don't actually end up doing anything. We want to make sure that we're driving the right people to the website to kind of create those actions. So that's kind of something else that I would say. But there's been a lot of other benefits that we've seen from shifting our kind of optimization and reporting towards the metrics that matter. We've been able to it's given us the opportunity to create a language to talk about how, different ad formats perform. So we have some really great high impact formats, for example. And it's been very difficult for us in the past to talk about why they are more successful than some standard formats potentially, but actually looking at things like the attention metrics really gives us the language to be able to talk about those ad formats in a specific way and demonstrate that actually it's not just about getting a click-through rate. Actually, these ads are driving high attention quality, high dwell interaction, all of those other metrics that help us demonstrate that quality of the attention. It's helped us also demonstrate that actually subscribers have a stronger resonance with ads, which is something that we weren't necessarily expecting. We wanted to show that subscribers and non-subscribers both engage with ads really well, but actually we were seeing more and more evidence that the more you sort of had an affiliation with the Telegraph as a brand, because of the way that we were delivering ads in a responsible way that kind of conformed to that reader first quality environment, that actually people were happy to put that kind of emotional connection onto the ads that they saw in that space as well. So that's been really great for us. I have to say as well, lockdown for us came at a good time in terms of where we were with our metrics, because we saw a lot of shift in the behaviours of our readers. As you kind of know from sort of industry insight, there was a shift towards quality news, where people were sort of really making sure that they were reading news from a verified source. We saw people coming to the homepage in a way that they hadn't done for years, not bouncing in and bouncing out from a kind of social link, but actually coming to the homepage and using that as a directory for the news that they were going to consume in that moment. We saw things like page views per session increase because of that as well. And actually we saw a big shift in the kind of content that people were looking at. So people moved away from, what's going on out in town, cultural events, towards things like cooking and gardening and all the things that we were doing during the first lockdown. And having metrics that matter in place really gave us the language and the evidence to show that actually the ads in that space were, equally kind of benefiting from the engagement and seeing those attention qualities go up as well. So that was really great for us to be able to give that to our customers. And also with brand metrics, we saw that brands that were suddenly more relevant, and we had a social a product for a social brand, a social media brand that actually became more relevant in order to be able to connect families. And we saw the brand uplift on that shoot up as it became more relevant during lockdown as well. So I think really, I'm going to shift to my perspective as the chair of Intermedia in a minute, but I just want to finish off my kind of bit talking about the work that we've done at the Telegraph, talking about trust, because I really think that what's emerged for us is that trust is the ultimate KPI. If you can't trust a brand, then whatever else benefit it's bringing to you as a consumer, you're still probably not going to buy it. And actually, what we've also seen is that trust is a two-way street. So there's a report from DigiJ called the True Cost of Deceptive Advertising, and that really looks at the impact if you don't consider and curate the advertisers that are kind of appearing in your publication, then if you have deceptive ads or bad players, then bad actors, then they are they're going to actually bring down and ultimately damage your brand as a publisher as well. So it's really important that you consider that it really is a two-way street. It's not just brands leaning on your quality brand perception, but actually you've got to make sure that you're looking after your brand and that the ads aren't impacting it in that way as well. We've done a lot of work with our readers to look at the trust that they have with us, and it always comes out really, really high. In fact, trust and credibility come out as two of the really strong key attributes, brand attributes, that people associate with the Telegraph. But what's really, really great for us to see is that there is then also evidence that actually if they see an ad brand in the Telegraph, they are much more likely to trust that. So I think it was something like 80%, 85% of people said that they were more likely to trust a brand that they saw in the Telegraph over some other channels. And actually what was really nice to see was that we sort of asked about a few different channels and platforms that the people would expect to see ads on, and quality news really was at the top of that list overall, and then social platforms being at the bottom. And it was interesting, I think it was Amy, I think you said at the top of the panel that actually trust in advertisers is below estate agents. What we're really seeing is there's nuance there, that actually quality heritage news brands actually have a really good level of trust, but we're being brought down by some of the more prominent platforms that are considered digital. So we really want to see the industry shift, understand that nuance and shift towards differentiating between a quality publishing space and a kind of algorithm based space that isn't necessarily curated and edited by a professional person. And so I'm just going to finish off. I'm aware that I've probably already gone over time, so my apologies, but I also want to consider this in a sort of broader perspective. So as chair of Intermedia, we really have a focus on how we can look at representation within the media industry. And I think there's a few things that we need to really think about that would really help deliver that. So brand safety for me is absolutely key, because it's really driving where ad spend is going. And it does mean, if you, George Floyd, for example, I think there was a stat around the amount of ad spend that was lost because people were using the, George Floyd in their kind of block lists. So we really need to kind of rethink that. I think what brand safety needs to be defined. It's about the quality of that content and the agenda of that content, and not about the content itself. We should be funding difficult, challenging stories, absolutely, but actually, we're not doing that at the moment. So that for me, I'd really like to see that shift in brand safety. And actually, there's a lot of evidence that hard news, the neuroscience research that Newsworks did, shows that actually hard news works really, really well for ads. I really want to see big improvements in the sourcing and representation of minority groups. I think one of the big problems we have at the moment, and the nervousness around some of those challenging stories, is quite often stories are written for instead of written by. I think that would really, really help if we consider that actually if we're talking about a minority group or a particular community, that actually the community that you're referring to should have input into that content and itself. I think that's really important. And I think actually for me, one of the big things that happened this year was the Facebook boycott. I was really kind of encouraged to see advertisers really taking the opportunity to engage with how that ad spend was funding, essentially fake news, and actually kind of sort of put their money where their mouth is and say, no more, we're going to fund this anymore. And it's really encouraging, I think, to see the formation of Facebook News. Finally, it's that recognition of the quality news journalism that's out there. And it's going to be, a human curation rather than that kind of unregulated algorithm putting that content together. So that's really kind of important for me. And finally, the other thing I think that's really encouraging in the industry is that shift towards the sub-strategies. So obviously, working at the Telegraph, I have internal insight on how that's going. But I think it's really important because that looks at those long-term goals and not the short-term kind of performance goals. It's really putting publications back into that customer product-centric space. As I said before, referring to our customers as readers and not users. If you look at documentaries like The Great Hack and Social Dilemma, they've gone into a lot of detail on kind of the impacts of the way that some publications are looking to gain revenue. And I think doing that through having a subscription strategy really helps kind of regulate that quality. So I think we need to be, really responsible for our data, and ultimately, as an advertiser, your litmus test for where you're spending your ad funds should be based on whether a publisher is providing entertainment and education to their readers, and not based on if they're just purely there to collect data points or to drive, ad revenues and nothing else. So I think that's kind of really, really crucial. And that is it. I'm sorry, I'm very sure I've gone over, but thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Anthony. I think there's a clear theme emerging here around language and how language helps us make these decisions. Whether it's switching from the word blacklist to blocklist, or whether it's talking about readers versus users, or even, where you wanted to push back on the client, but you didn't have the language to explain some of these more quality metrics like attention and propensity to scroll. So we'll definitely come back to that at the end and think about the language that we can use to sort of give ourselves more power. I'm going to go on to our next speaker. So next up we have Harvin Gupta. So Harvin is the Director of Solutions Engineering at Xandr. So it'll be really helpful and interesting to consider the role that tech platforms play in the center of all of these different players in helping make our industry more accountable.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, my name's Harvin. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good stuff. So yeah, my name's Harvin and I'm Director of Solutions Engineering at Xandr. I wanted to spend the next 5 minutes talking about some of the changes that I'm seeing in our industry that I think are heading in a positive direction, and I believe will build the foundations for a much more ethical ad economy. And by that, I mean an economy that has better aligned incentives, more focus on quality and quality relationships, and finally, a more sustainable value chain. So I want to start with what I think is a really simple question, and that's, what's the point of serving an ad if no one sees it? Or another way of asking this question is, what's the return on investment to an advertiser for an ad that receives no attention and therefore has no impact? And the answer is clearly zero, right? There is no point in serving an ad if no one sees it. And there's no return on ad spend, no return on investment to an advertiser if that ad goes on to have no impact. But because of the way the third-party cookie works, and because of things like last touch attribution, it is actually possible that buying super cheap ads at the very bottom of the page, ads that actually no one goes on to ever see, can make your campaigns look like they're performing well. We used to call this cookie bombing, and it's a really good example of how the cookie can lead to misaligned incentives. So now, with the death of the third-party cookie, with that kind of concept going away, it's the perfect time to align on targeting and measuring what's actually really matters, what's important to advertisers. And for me, that's if an ad gets the user's attention and therefore if it has impact. And we've actually heard that said by a few of the other speakers as well. So the first attention metric that the industry has embraced and really put our arms around is viewability. But I think we can go a lot further than that. At Xandr, we've developed a suite of products called Guaranteed Outcomes. So these allow us to basically guarantee an advertiser 100% of their banners will be in view, or 100% of their video will be watched till completion. But I actually want to see this go further. And this speaks to something Anthony was talking about, which is taking time and using that as a new currency. And I've actually got a meeting with I was really pleased with all the stuff Anthony was saying, actually, because I've got a meeting with a product manager today to discuss some of these concepts. So what I really want to see happen is time, like hours and minutes, to be a new way of booking campaigns. So we can guarantee that the ad will be in view for a certain amount of time, and actually using the platform algorithms to be able to guarantee that. Okay, moving on. The next thing I want to discuss is the changing attitude advertisers have to scale. And again, this is something I've heard from the other speakers as well. We've got used to scale being one of the most important things. And we've all got used to seeing inclusion lists of thousands and sometimes even tens of thousands of domains. The problem is, it's really hard to have quality at that scale. So instead, what I'm seeing is forward-facing advertising agencies, they're ditching these huge inclusion lists and instead focusing on building deeper relationships with a smaller number of premium publishers. And I've heard the word curation mentioned a few times, and I think that really sums up what's going on. So what I'm seeing is the role of an inventory manager at an agency is growing in importance. So these are people that are often coming from the sell side. You know, they're coming from an ad ops background, but they're now working on the buy side to help agencies better understand the inventory they're buying. And for the first time, I'm hearing agencies come and ask questions to publishers like, how do you structure your inventory? How's it segmented? How do you break out individual placements? What's the most granular level I can target your inventory at? And what key values are you passing in on the ad request? So this allows advertisers to really fine tune the context and the environment that the ad appears in. And I heard someone talk about how, I think it's in relation to Facebook, but I think it applies here, that we can't just leave these things to the algorithms. And sometimes if you've got thousands and thousands of websites, you have to leave it to the algorithms. Whereas if you focus on maybe 20, 30, 40 really premium publishers, you can actually build a relationship with those publishers and get to know them and get to understand how their inventory is structured. And I think this is something that's going to grow in importance as advertisers are going to increasingly expect the context and the environment that the ad is served in to amplify the creative message. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about is transparency. So one of the biggest things to happen this year was the release of a study by ISBA and PwC. And this basically showed how an advertiser's budget travels through the supply chain. And it specifically called out that there was an unknown delta where some of this money wasn't accounted for. And what I've seen since then is a real push for transparency. And this is coming from all corners of the industry. It's coming from buyers, publishers, agencies, tech platforms. I think everyone agrees that to build a more sustainable value chain, we need to have transparency. And what I think is important here is that advertisers are starting to care much more about where their ad dollars end up. They're starting to think much more about the kind of content they're funding and the type of publishers that they're associated with. They care about how much money they're putting into the hands of these publishers, and they want to be able to report against these types of things. So as an industry, I think we really do need to solve transparency in order to build a much more sustainable value chain. And I think the foundations for that have been built this year. So to conclude, it's important that as an industry, we protect the open internet, because for me, the open internet is a really important part of our liberal society and a really important part of our democracy. And advertising is, well, it's the lifeblood of the open internet. So it's important that we get this right and we build an ethical ad economy and a sustainable ad economy. And I think like we're heading in the right direction. Some of the changes that I've seen this year are building that foundation, but I think we've actually still got a long way to go. So I want to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Arvin. I'm not sure I agree that the biggest thing to happen this year is the ISBA PwC report. It's been a pretty big year, but I certainly agree that funding the open internet is one of the most important jobs that we do every day. And so it's really great to hear some of the ways that that's playing out within the Xandr network. So next up we have Dora Mikhail. She's currently a consultant at the Ozone Project and has, the Ozone Project has been described as the UK's leading high attention digital advertising environment. So, this word attention is coming up a lot across some of our speakers. It's clearly an important way to differentiate quality and build trust. So really excited to hear what Dora has to say. On mute. Classic.
Indeed. Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everybody. So thanks so much, Amy. Yes, absolutely agree with you that for me, point about attention, it's so interesting that every one of the speakers so far, almost everybody has kind of underlined that point. And I think the first thing I'd say about it is that consumers are paying attention, people are paying attention. And it's never been more apparent, I suppose, than this year, when it has been such a pivotal moment in sort of, I suppose, our lifetimes. But if I take a step back a bit, you mentioned the Ozone Project. Yes, I'm consulting for them at the moment. I've been there about 6 months or so. Prior to that, I was at the Telegraph. So I was one of the Telegraph is a founding partner of, or founding shareholder of the Ozone Project, and I led that move towards the creation of it. And it was conceived as an alternative way for brands to connect directly with publishers, and for those publishers and advertisers to have a greater say in the direction of their product roadmaps and the determination of their digital advertising strategies. For a long time, I think that the technology in the middle, as I think you described it, was determining the future of digital advertising, which is not right. They shouldn't be at the center of it. The consumer should be at the center of it, and we are all serving the needs of that consumer. So we have to rethink that this year, and I think we have already started to. Ozone was founded on two main beliefs: that the digital ecosystem can be more trusted, more compliant, safer, and way more effective than what has come before, and that through greater collaboration, advertisers and publishers can and should be setting that agenda. And secondly, by offering a single point of access for advertisers into a premium marketplace built on trusted, editorially governed content, Ozone can offer a legitimate consumer privacy by design alternative to some of the bad practices that we've seen in the last decade or so. Underlining these foundational beliefs and at the core of our values and purpose is the mission to deliver a more sustainable future for journalism and premium publishers. So at just 2 or 3 years old, Ozone is able to offer both privacy by design, but also purpose by design. Ozone is unencumbered by 200 years of legacy, which some of our customers are challenged by in this area, and I think that's a really exciting place to be. Harvin just mentioned the demise of the cookie and the current introspection, I suppose, of our industry. There are key changes that are underway that will build that fairer, more accountable and transparent future for our industry, but we are all responsible for seeing that through. I'll come back to that idea of putting the customer first, redefining success, aligning incentives through the supply chain, and the last one of that is valuing context, which I'm heartened to see lots of us have already talked about so far. I think a couple of points across all of those things. So putting the customer first, if it's good for the customer, it's good for business. It's just as simple as that. We saw practices over the last decade or so, actually probably before that, where readers were not put first, advertisers were. And there's been a shift over the last couple of years. Anthony talked about the Telegraph's subscription reader first strategy, and the Telegraph is one of many globally premium publishers putting that at the very top of their agenda, and that is a good thing for advertisers. And when we think about how we measure the I guess the importance of that and the success of that, all of those brand metrics that are on offer around brand lift, how the campaign has affected different funnel measures, be it awareness, consideration preference or purchase intent, all of those things are they come to life when the customer has been put first. I'm actually going to leave it there simply because I know we're going to run out of time, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great questions. So some of my other thoughts, I'm just going to pause and leave them for the next part, which is the Q&A.
What a teaser to end us on. No, you're totally right. It's not the tech in the center, it's the consumer. And that perspective is what flows through all of this conversation. Actually, you've really called out that's a really lovely theme that we're seeing across all the different speakers is just getting back to what the whole point of this is and who we should be serving. So our final speaker before we go into the questions is Jerry. So Jerry Dakin leads marketing and digital transformation at GSK. He is also diversity ambassador for the World Federation of Advertisers and part of a steering group for the Global Alliance for Responsible Media and a director of the Conscious Advertising Network. So I think it's fair to say Jerry wears many hats, but all of those hats are sustainably sourced.
Very good introduction there, and yeah, it's hard to go after such a sort of a bunch of really fantastic speakers and try and say anything new. I suppose I would start by just saying I echo a huge amount of what's been said before, but I guess I'm trying to bring a sort of slight client perspective to this. So yeah, I work in my day job at GSK Consumer Healthcare. You know, we sell Sensodyne and Panadol and spend a huge amount of money on media and marketing, and therefore where we spend that money matters. And in short, I guess my personal experience of this has been sort of being from joining the marketing industry because I liked jingles and advertising and all that creativity, to last year being sort of dragged in front of the United Nations Human Rights Court, where some of us from the Conscious Advertising Network tried to explain why advertisers were funding hate and terrorism and all sorts of things. So it's been certainly been a journey, and for me, a lot of that journey began when I took on a global role. I worked a few different places: Mondelez, Dentsu, Cara with Dan. I worked at Diageo for a while. At Diageo, I led global media partnerships. And global media partnerships are the big relationships that companies have with Facebook and Google and Twitter and those kind of companies at a global level. And they're always challenging things to lead for many reasons. But for a long time, they were sort of really exciting, fun. Everyone wanted to be part of them. The conversations were all about innovation, effectiveness, what you could do more. And then suddenly there was kind of a hard stop in a way, when those conversations really changed. And for me, actually, I was on holiday in New York watching the Macy's Thanksgiving parade. And I kept getting calls from my boss on my personal number. And I was like, she doesn't know I'm on leave. And she's usually quite good about this. And it basically turned out that Diageo was going to be on the front page of the Sunday Times or the Times, whatever it was, the next day, with one of the stories that broke a few years ago about how our activity on YouTube was accidentally funding some pretty horrific, some pretty dark material. And it really, I mean, we'd been thinking about brand safety, we've been trying to lean into that challenge for a while, but it really highlighted just how kind of serious and impactful that can be. You know, fast forward, I think even just yesterday, a report came out from New Zealand showing that the Christchurch massacre down in New Zealand, that the terrorist involved in that had been radicalized on YouTube. And this is by no means an attack on YouTube. I think, you know, actually all the spaces, platforms like YouTube and Facebook, despite all the pressure they rightly get, they often are much safer spaces than some of where we throw our media. And in fact, one thing we saw was advertisers really pull on this brake and, like, you know, try and pull up the drawbitch and put pressure on those kind of advertisers. Many advertisers pausing those big platforms, those big networks. At the same time, a lot of those advertisers still continuing to buy really long tail programmatic inventory, with, you know, potentially with some sort of promise of quality, some promises of brand safety coming from tagging or something like that, but really, you know, throwing some of their media out into quite wild pastures. What we did at Diageo was to take on something we called a trusted marketplace, which was to really try and reduce where our media was going, to really have control of it, to really pay attention, brief the partners we were going to work with, be kind of confident, a bit of some what Havas have done in terms of creating a more ethical network. It wasn't all about ethics, but it was certainly about quality and trust. It was certainly about trying to have more control, and that was quite a hard process, quite an arduous process. And one thing it did straight away was it made our plans go up in cost. We were cutting off quite a long tail. Diageo had been quite conservative already. They didn't buy like a crazy long tail, but, you know, there was always some cheaper inventory in there, which ultimately pads out your plans. And we saw CPMs go up. We saw accordingly reach coming down. We saw lots of worries from the brands, from the teams saying, oh, this, you know, we like what you're trying to do here, but it seems to be having a negative effect. And then fast forward 6 months, and it was quite the opposite. The sort of as measurement results and impact results and things started to come in, it was showing quite the opposite, that our digital was becoming more effective, more impactful. And actually what we were doing was cutting off a long tail of space that were kind of artificially cheap, but maybe not that effective. And we were moving towards being much more clear in terms of how we land and how we make sure we appear in high quality spaces. That is good for the brand. It's, you know, you want on TV and traditional media, we pay a lot of attention to what we appear alongside. So why shouldn't we do the same in traditional media? It's also good for our consumers. We start funding journalism, we start funding quality entertainment, we start funding diverse voices and content you'd want to exist. At GSK, we've been on a similar journey, trying to crack this sort of brand safety space. But I think brand safety has become a sort of an emergency parachute, that people jumping out of a plane, buying some programmatic media and saying, don't worry, I'll pull this sort of viewability brand safety parachute, and you know, I won't crash into the ground, I'll kind of be okay. And there's some truth in that, and you know, certainly please do that. You know, don't have no settings in place, but those settings are quite blunt. They can have a real downside. We've heard many stories across the last few people about how, you know, by having George Floyd or COVID, you can block a huge amount of news. We've also seen horror stories of people putting things like lesbian or Muslim, blocking like entire diverse groups from your audience, you know. But it's not just sort of that. It's also like, as you're jumping out this plane and, you know, relying on your brand safety parachute, if you bothered to look up, you'd see there are some advertisers who've really bothered to pay attention to quality, to attention, to premium placement, and they're kind of gliding around at a much higher level, discovering that there is really great inventory in the internet. There is really great places where your brands can shine, have a bigger impact, not only do the good thing for your business, but probably fund something that's a little bit better. And that's certainly the direction we're trying to push in at GSK. It's not easy, and the PwC audit, which was the big event of this year, nothing else happened. We were part of that. It was a really eye-opening piece. We did quite well in a way out of it, but it did expose, you know, we were buying across a lot of sites. We were spread quite thinly, and we've been challenging ourselves to do more there. And yeah, to wrap up, I mean, I wear a whole load of other hats as well, like the Conscious Advertising Network we've heard mentioned a few times, but I really encourage brands, but also agencies and partners out there to look into those manifestos, look into some of their guidance. I volunteer for Advertising as well, which particularly supports LGBT people working in our industry and encourages our industry to better represent those people in our advertising. And that's true in media as well. You know, if we put like sweeping block list words like lesbian or gay, then not only are you sort of defunding you're not reaching large amounts of your audience, you're really defunding that news. There were stories that came out of places like Vice, where Vice was saying, look, our editorial team really struggles to positively cover some of these topics because advertisers defund us. And hopefully we're getting to a better place than that. And so from an advertiser perspective, it's been a ride. But I think we're hopefully going to start seeing, and you know, there are many big advertisers out there who clearly care a huge amount about this, who've rallied behind this, who've spoken very publicly about this challenge. Many advertisers have lots of good stuff in place. I certainly think there's some of those brand safety steps that we're all taking are a good first step, but most advertisers could go further to sort of dig into their quality, to dig into what they're funding. And especially when you look at the other smaller things that have happened this year, like elections and pandemics and things like that, you know, advertisers have a responsibility for funding the checks and balances that sit around them, the news, the entertainment we need to give us a break from it all. And so, yeah, you can sleep better as an advertiser, knowing not only are you doing the right stuff for your brands, but you're doing the right stuff for your consumers and society, if we make some of the right decisions in this space. So thank you for having us.
Nice, thanks, Jerry. I'm going to stick with you for the first question, actually, just whilst you're in the hot seat. But if all the other speakers want to turn your cameras on, and we'll then sort of open up the floor. At the beginning of this event, I talked about this Cobras in India thing. You know, they were running on a cost per Cobra, right? CPC. And they had pretty bad results. In our industry, we run on cost per mil, cost per click. You know, a lot of the metrics that matter most are tied to cost. So how have you seen other brands shift away from price to value, and what are the metrics that can help people do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because cost is not only, you know, the most easily accessible metric. It's kind of what a lot of things are traded on, and especially in in a brand advertising world, it's often quite hard to close that loop and sort of, you know, truly trade on kind of effectiveness, etc. I think we've seen some people trying that, you know, some of the bigger platforms like Google is trying to trade on, you know, cost per sort of brand lift point increase and things like that. I mean, cost isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just you have to be careful about it, and you have to be careful. I think, so for me, viewability is a really interesting example of like a metric that's kind of seen by many to solve a lot of these problems, and I think actually creates a lot of these problems. Like viewability is brought in, you know, you can describe it, you know, of course you want your advert to be seen. Yes, of course, you know, yeah, get rid of all those bad sites that don't show it. The challenge is that like a super highly viewable site, you know, like the most viewable site you can imagine is like a slideshow site. So, you know, there's like awful celebrity plastic surgery slideshow sites, like built, you can't scroll, you can't even work how to leave the page, you know. they've locked you in, but they've also got like 15,000 other adverts on the screen, and you know, it's a terrible user experience, it's a terrible advertiser experience, but you know, somewhere in your dashboard it's giving you 100% viewability. Whereas, you know, front page of the Wall Street Journal or something, someone lands on the page, scrolls down, they you know, possibly not a viewable impression. Same with, you know, Facebook and places like that. So I think there's a push on not being quite so blunt with how we look at metrics, and we talked a bit about attention. I think attention is a good point in terms of where we're trying to lean into, to sort of not just, you know, to take into account some other aspects of what you might call attention. So like what else is on the screen, how much of the screen do you have, you know, how quality is that environment. So yeah, I think there's always a risk with any one number which you think is, you know, solved your quality problem. It probably hasn't, and you kind of need to bring a few different pieces together. Because yeah, generally speaking, having a high viewability is a good thing. You know, don't get me wrong, but sometimes you need to dig a little bit deeper to understand kind of, you know, what's driving that.
Sure. No, I totally, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, what we've heard across the different speakers is that there's not going to be one silver bullet here. I wanted to pick up on something that's been mentioned a couple of times, in this idea of quality journalism and avoiding the long tail. I wonder if the panel could speak a little bit about how that complements or contradicts one of the other things that's been spoken about a lot on this panel, which is the idea of, you know, the social equity marketplace, of supporting more diverse ranges of publications, more diverse speakers, you know, more diverse voices. There's a risk if you focus on the real top tier, then you're also sort of funding the establishment, as it was. How do you balance this need for diversity of reach with quality of content? I think perhaps Dora, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and actually, interestingly, a conversation I had 2 days ago with some colleagues at the Ozone Project, because it is we're talking about, you know, 200-year-old businesses who have historically been quite underserving of anybody outside of the establishment. One thing that we've been talking about is, so the founding shareholders are absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Amy. It's the Telegraph, the Guardian, Reach PLC, and News UK. What we have built, though, is a piece of technology that is essentially software as a service, and we've started having conversations with certain certain alliances that are looking at what the Ozone Project has done in terms of providing an alternative to the other platforms, and we're now able to offer this software to other businesses who are trying to do the same thing. It would be wrong to name these businesses, but there are brilliant businesses out there who are aggregating diverse content and are looking at ways in which they can accelerate some of that growth. And it's a really important topic. and one I completely agree with, and I'm hoping to solve despite saying technology should not be at the center. Sometimes it actually solves a brilliant problem if you're using technology responsibly. So that's how I'm looking at things.
Lauren, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so to Dora's point about building, or aggregating all these, I guess, publications. So this is why we set up OMG Unite. We've gone through lots of different names of this agency, but over the last couple of years, it's really focused on creating a huge database, actually, of curated, I guess, publications. Publications such as The Voice newspaper that's been around for a really long time, that's been quite a staple publication in Afro-Caribbean, I guess, background. I mean, I grew up on it. Having that focus and being intentional about going out to look for these publications is the only way that we can actually get true balance. And my point earlier on about having human intervention, to Dora's point, yes, you need tech, but you still need really smart people to be able to understand, what these spaces are, how we should, be interacting with, these publications and where they sit on a media plan. And without that, it's impossible to really get a full breadth of who's out there and who is worthy, worthy is probably not the wrong word, but who should be part of the mix when we're looking at, a nice diverse set of publications.
No, that makes total sense. Dan, I was wondering if there was anything from a meaningful media perspective. I think this sort of social equity marketplace is a really innovative way of approaching this problem. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Sure, ultimately, I agree with both points already made. Finding the right balance of people and technology. I think people are great at curating and finding things and providing that subjective lens on it. Technology can then help us to deploy it in a way that puts it on the same, I guess, level playing field as everything else. So there's an issue with the ease of going to market. Yeah, a sort of blind, huge, long tail is easy to manage if you don't have to look at it, because we have the technology in place to do that. A huge scaled buy is easy to manage with where 80% of the money invested online goes, because it's two players. That's really easy to manage. It's harder to manage a carefully curated list that we have vetted everyone. So we have to kind of create that environment so that everything's on the same level playing field. It's kind of like in the same way to change. It's like the difference between not being a racist to being anti-racist. Anti-racist is about thinking about how do we change the policy to create a level playing field. We have to do the same thing in this sort of space and sort of be positively ethical, I guess, in the way that we create the environment, because it's just, Jerry probably has a perspective on this. It's hard work to manage all of this stuff. So we have to create that level playing field so everyone can manage each element in the same way. And that's kind of what social equity marketplaces are all about. It's saying, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Client, we're giving you this opportunity. We encourage you to test it. And once we start testing it, we will find that it's just as easy to use. And hopefully, it will also give you great results. And so far we're seeing it's giving you great results. But if it's too hard to access, you'll never get to that. So we have to sort of almost change policy to make it easier to access, I think.
This combination of humans and technology, sort of empowering one with the other. We have a question from the audience. So Femi has written, is the shift in performance indicators being driven from a particular part of the industry, brands, agencies, publishers, or tech vendors? So what areas of the industry are you seeing this come from, and what role do each of us play? Harvin, perhaps you could kick us off.
Yeah, from the tech platform perspective, a big change has come from regulation. So things like the third-party cookie going away, a lot of our industry and a lot of the tech that we have has been plumbed around the cookie, and that's how we've done everything. So a lot of the conversations I've been having are, well, we can't do what we did in the past. That way of working is going, and so that gives us an opportunity to think through, well, actually, what do we want to measure? but also how are we going to measure it? So I'm having a lot of conversations around what can we do instead of using IDs and instead of transmitting IDs down the supply chain, what can we do instead that still allows us to have rich measurement, but in a kind of privacy safe way. So I'd say the change is being driven from my perspective by a lot of the regulation that's coming in, but also that's the perfect opportunity to have these types of conversations as well.
And Jerry, go for it, Lauren.
I was going to say, coming from a performance background, my entire career, for me, it's been normal. I think the shift that I've seen has been clients shifting their portfolio. So I think this year has been a really good example of brands that have had to do more digital, for example, who probably weren't doing as much before, who've had to explore, new channels, new ways of communicating with their consumers. And performance works, you know exactly where that pound is going and you know what you're going to get from it. But I actually disagree with digital performance. I mean, I don't disagree with it as a concept, but I think everything is performance. So a brand lift study is performance based. Every single pound that a brand spends is meant to do something, right? Whether it's drive reach, whether it's drive sales or leads, everything should be performance based. And I think that what we're going to start to see is brands being a lot more intentional about how we're measuring. So you're going to see more, really detailed measurement frameworks. There's going to be a lot more focus on, how offline and online is starting to converge. And I think it's just everybody just wants to get a better, clearer view of where that money's going.
And Jerry, from your perspective, do you see the impetus coming from brands to your agencies, or do you expect it to kind of flow the other way? Have you seen it work particularly well in certain contexts?
I mean, it works best when it flows in all directions for sure. But I think brands can't really shirk the fact that we're at the top of the chain here in many ways, and what we brief and what we ask for. And so if you ask your agency, get me the cheapest possible media reach, most agencies will put some things in place. They won't buy awful things, but they will buy you the cheapest possible reach. And if you haven't told them that prioritizing quality or prioritizing various other things are of huge importance to your business, they won't be able to make those things up for you, and some businesses don't prioritize those things. So absolutely, and I mean that's one of the things the Conscious Advertising Network really pushes, that you should put this in your brief, that you should talk to your agencies about this. We find as soon as you tell your agency, I care about quality, I really care about brand safety more than just doing the basics. There are lots of things that agencies are really keen to do. We've heard many of the speakers today talking, lots of people at those agencies are really passionate about doing that. Lots of people at agencies really want to be buying good stuff for their clients, to be investing and making these right decisions. So you're not necessarily battling against anything, but you do have to, put that directive in there. At the same time, agencies have the opportunity to bring this agenda to their clients. Like I think many clients, it's a confusing space. Like I work in a dedicated media team. It's all I think about, and I lean in quite heavily to this topic. It's still confusing to me. You can imagine without that, many brands with quite big budgets don't have dedicated media teams. So it's the brand managers having to deal with this. They're, that you can't expect them to be kind of thought leaders in this space. And that is why we, one of the great things that we would expect an agency to bring would be that challenge, that provocation, that gold standard. So it works well when we see it at all levels, and certainly I think for some of the publishers out there, I know digital has been a challenging time for many in the industry, but this is a great opportunity, whereas if we can tell this strong narrative of the importance of that where we advertise does really matter, and create great networks like the Ozone Project and things that allow us to tap into that. I think we can get to a better balance where we still do some stuff on big, wide open programmatic, but we do a lot of stuff in a much more controlled and quality way.
And I think, if I may, I think this is why the conversation about measurement of the ethical ad economy, as we've called it, is actually so important, because until you can measure something different to what you've been able to measure before, you're just going to keep going and do what you've always done. And Lauren made a really, really important point at the beginning where you talked about, until we had GDPR, we were just cookie bombing the hell out of the internet, and it's crap, you know, but we were forced to stop. And it was those things that made us look at our practices and get more creative in the way that we could do things better. And I couldn't agree more in terms of, you know, once you can measure something, then you can target, and once you've got a target, you become accountable. And so I'm all for targets in all of the areas that we've been talking about, because it's the only thing that forces us as humans to make changes. Otherwise, we just get complacent and we just keep doing what we've always done.
Totally agree. No, that's a good rousing speech as well, because I think GDPR has illustrated that we can make change, you know, when we're when we're dragged into it. So maybe let's do it before we get dragged this time. Okay, so I think in terms of ethical media, we've covered a little bit on diversity. We've covered a little bit on, you know, using attention and using more quality metrics. We've talked a bit about being careful with the block lists, and ensuring that we're giving a space for diverse voices within our media plans, and we're funding quality, diverse journalism. There are probably two areas left that I wanted to dig into a little bit more. And just a reminder to the audience, there is a Q&A. If you want to drop anything in, I will read it out. The two areas left would be sustainability and sort of how media can be green, and then also data privacy. Dan, you mentioned that both of those are sort of tackled within your remit. I was wondering if you've seen particular trends or particular initiatives that have helped drive either of those particular issues forwards.
Sure. So which order to go in? So I think sustainability, I mean, it's a funny one. It's sort of, we've done slightly better than we've probably done in a long time this year, not because we necessarily wanted to, but because we had to. But at the same time, it also has taken a sort of lower rung on the ladder because other things have become sort of more important. But I think what's really interesting, just on a global scale, is the effort we can make as a collective when all the incentives are aligned, you know, to several other people's points. So I actually think we can do a lot more than we currently do. We need to find a way of aligning those aligning those incentives. It's also, I will put this out, super hard to measure. So, you know, I talked about us creating the social equity marketplaces, and sustainability is one of the measures. So particularly the French version, or the one they launched with around social equity marketplaces, was very much around sustainability, around climate change, around those sort of green credentials. It's hard to measure. You know, sort of measuring that carbon footprint of my media is tough to measure, genuinely, because there's so many things involved in that ecosystem. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So and we have talked about this, you know, internally as could we create a sustainability score for all of the media partners that we work against? And it's definitely something that's on the agenda. It's one of those ones that's sort of on the side of that's quite tough. It's going to take a little bit of time to do it, because you kind of have to also do it fairly for everyone. You know, you have to measure everyone in the same sort of fair way, and that depends on how many chains of that supply chain you really want to go down to be able to make that measure. So I think it's challenging, but I also think it's worthwhile. It's something we're looking at, but it's something that's going to, I think, take us some time. So, but you can start simply, you know. So the French social equity marketplace is largely looking at what people's efforts are to lower their footprint effectively. So we're just using the simplest metrics we can to start creating that collective. The data privacy side. So I agree, and I think GDPR has been great at raising the consciousness, but we've also seen still a lot of very poor practice, and actually GDPR, and to a certain degree California legislation, it lacks a little bit of teeth. You know, we have seen that. We have seen that there haven't been, I certainly expected to see some much more high profile cases happen, and some much bigger retribution happen as well, I guess. And we kind of haven't seen that to a certain degree. So I think we do need to think about we do need to think about, can we give more teeth to that to ensure we get the right and the good behavior around that. I'm a big fan in data privacy of being transparent with people. You know, you look at, and again, I'm not going to comment on the quality of documentary making around things like social dilemma and things like that, but they highlight interesting points about sort of what consumers think. Consumers think we track everything. They think that we are, you know, surgical in our precision of marketing to people. And, you know, from my experience, actually, of being a consumer, much less being on the inside of the industry, that's just simply not true. You know, I see the quality of ads that chase me around the internet, and it's dreadful. You know, it's absolutely terrible. So, I think we need to almost go the other way and be really transparent about what we're doing with data, how we're working with data, how we can work with people to get actually better quality data. You know, the death of the third-party cookie arguably is a great thing, but frequency capping is already pretty bad on the internet, and it's probably going to get a lot worse because of that. So there are downsides to that, but I think we should be more communicative about it. We should talk about it, and we should work with consumers. We should work with emerging technologies that are being very transparent about it and say, hey, we want to get more data, but we want you to be involved in that conversation. We want to be transparent about it so that we can both benefit. You get hopefully better advertising. We are able to be, you know, good and responsible with what we do.
And just to add to that, Dan, I think with transparency, consumers will have a much better understanding of the value exchange that's taking place. And you mentioned before as well about how paying them back for the value of their data. But in some respects, the fact that they're getting so much free content, and it's expensive to fund that content, right? It's expensive to have journalists and editors and designers and all that. And I think more needs to be done to explain to users in a transparent way of what's going on, how that data is being used. Like you said, it's not that kind of precision targeting. We need to move away from that way of working completely. And I think some of the work being done around cohorts and that kind of thing speaks to that. But yeah, I'm really interested in how we can have the conversation with users to make sure that they understand that value exchange is taking place.
I mean, all of advertising is a value exchange, right? People are giving us their time and their attention, and in exchange, we're funding the free internet. So going back to that value exchange, as Dora says, going back to the consumer at the heart of this is really crucial. So we're about at time now, which is such a shame because I could ask you 10 more questions. But just to sort of wrap up, I think it's really about using technology as a tool to empower us, but there's nuance, and that nuance is understood by humans. So, you know, humans can put it in the brief. Humans can, you know, like collaborate. I think, you know, the Ozone project is a fantastic illustration of how you can actually collaborate to create more. You know, Anthony, you called for data sharing, more openness, more collaboration from your clients and your agencies. I think, you know, that's going to be a big part of making our industry more ethical. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to finish there, but thank you as well to our audience, and thanks to AOP. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.